With the election so close between Trump and Harris, not a single voting bloc or vote can be taken for granted. When it comes to the Latino vote, Harris has, well, a complicated relationship. There has been a shift from Biden, and Harris is now polling at 59%. This means she closed the gap with Trump. But that said, it is well below what Obama polled at 72% and even Biden at 62%.
There are nuances within the Latino vote, and Kamala Harris has stepped in it more than once. Here with us today to break it all down is Federico de Jesús, a former communications aide to Nancy Pelosi and also Barack Obama. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Robbie. No, it's a pleasure to be with you and your viewers.
Oh, great to have you with us. Why don't you, lay it out for us? How is Kamala doing with this group compared to her predecessor, compared to President Joe Biden, and what does she need to do to capture more of the Latino vote?
Well, let's start with the nuance that you mentioned, Robbie, because I think that it bears repeating. A lot of Latino advocates repeat it every election cycle. Again, for both parties, the Latino vote is not a monolith. There are different national origin groups, different languages, Spanish, English, Spanglish, different generations, immigrants that are citizens, people that have been here for generations, different regional aspects. The Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania aren't the same voters as in Florida. The New Mexican American isn't the same as in California. The new arrivals aren't the same as people who've been in California forever. So within that context, it's also important to know that Hispanics aren't a racial group. They're an ethnic group that is multiracial. So that is important to understand. Why is it that Latino men tend to trend a little bit more towards Trump? And why is it that Democrats were lagging behind under Biden? To your question, her predecessor, Biden really ignored the immigration issue. And then it wasn't until this year that he saw the polling, even among Latinos that are concerned about border security, and moved into an enforcement-only bill. Kamala Harris went to Guatemala and said to immigrants, don't come. But she also met with her campaign staff in February before she was a candidate and said, look, I'm concerned. We need to do something about this. And she's doing a lot better. But as Nomi mentioned, she's not at the historic 63, 65, 72 the Democrats normally poll with Latino voters. And it's also important to note that it's the swing votes that count, right? It's the swing states and the Latinos in those states that matter, where she's doing very well, but again, not where she needs to be. And to answer your final question is, what does she need to do? She started very well in the convention, pivoting from border security only to comprehensive immigration reform. And polling is complicated, and we go back to the nuance. Latinos care about border security, maybe not in the way that some Trump Republicans might say it. They care about human trafficking, about drug smuggling. They don't want criminals to come into this country. But they also, and the polling shows it time and again, they favor a path to citizenship for immigrants that haven't committed crimes. So there's a lot of nuance here. There's a lot of different segments of that population, and there needs to be a lot more cultural attention to those differences.
Fede, you're from Puerto Rico, and when you look at Pennsylvania, more than half of the Latinos, in that swing state are Puerto Rican, and they're not doing great. It's a major problem. Pennsylvania is probably the most important swing state, in my opinion. So what is it that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz need to do to speak to Puerto Ricans in particular? And what is Donald Trump doing? Because there was some news this week about a pretty key endorsement from a reggaeton artist for Donald Trump.
So the polling that came out from Unidos US, the largest Latino group in this country this week, especially about Hispanics in Pennsylvania, say that overall Puerto Ricans are at the high 50s, similar to other Latinos. Among Puerto Ricans born in the island, and that's a big important distinction, it's in the low 60s, so they poll a lot better. But Trump is still getting 29 to 30% of the Puerto Rican vote there. And last week, Trump brought two reggaeton artists. Reggaeton is very popular among Latinos and non-Latinos. And Anuel AA, who's a convicted felon. He mentioned Puerto Rico as a country, which is another subject for another day. But those are the cultural things that Trump is paying attention to. And I haven't seen reggaeton artists come out for Kamala. Hopefully they're doing outreach and they have an opportunity to do better. But they're talking to a segment of Latino men and people that don't care about the whole crime and Trump tried to steal the election. They care about these cultural issues that obviously Trump is paying attention to, that Harris isn't paying attention. And again, she's doing a lot better than Biden in the polling. She's winning the Puerto Rican vote, but Pennsylvania was won by Biden by 80,000 votes. And there's 500,000 Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania that could decide this crucial key state for the 2024 election. So that's a start to your question that's very complicated and long.
Yeah, that's why so many of us were a little taken aback when she did not select as her running mate the popular governor of the must-win state. Even if, who you pick as your VP, it's only worth, a very little bit of a boost. But if she gets that boost in Pennsylvania, that's going to be what decides the election. Is the VP, is Tim Walz someone who's resonating with Latino voters?
Well, in the case of Puerto Ricans, he voted against the Promesa law in Congress when he was a member of Congress. That's the law that imposed the fiscal control board that's unelected in Puerto Rico. He's for comprehensive immigration reform. He's progressive, pro-union, but he also appeals to the white working rural class. So obviously, people in politics say that Pennsylvania is Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Alabama in between. And so there are a lot of other states that he appeals to. And if you were at the convention, like Nomi and I, and maybe Robbie, you were there too, he does engender a lot of excitement. And Kamala Harris also engenders a lot of excitement among Latinos. But again, this will be won in the margins, and there's an opportunity here for both to do a lot better.
Fede, we talk a lot about the male Latino vote, but let's talk about the female Latino vote. Is there excitement the way that there is in other demographics with women, black women, white women on the Democratic side seem to be incredibly excited and motivated? Are you seeing the same thing with the Latino community?
Definitely, Latina women are trending more towards Harris than Latino men, although both have increased in their share. There are a lot of kitchen table issues. There are a lot of economic issues. Kamala Harris has come up strong for taxing the rich, for expanding the child tax credit. Remember, the first expansion cut childhood poverty in half. Obviously, Republicans let it expire in Congress, so taking that up again will be key. And again, talking about border security and crime is important, but also talking about how immigrants are part of this country, being her a daughter of Jamaican and Indian immigrants. So I think that there's a great opportunity here. She looks like them and she needs to talk to them. She hasn't done a lot of TV interviews, and going on Univision, Hispanic radio, but also speaking to Latinos in English is key. Half of Latino voters speak English as a predominant language, and the other half is Spanish or Spanglish. So that's also key to remember, that you can't just have a one-size-fits-all strategy when it comes to the Latino vote.
In terms of on-the-ground organizing, what are you seeing? I mean, there's one thing to say they're not speaking or they're not talking about certain issues, but is there an on-the-ground operation in key states to organize Latino vote?
So yesterday, my good friend Julie Chavez Rodriguez, who's a granddaughter of legendary civic and agricultural leader Cesar Chavez, she tweeted that she left a meeting in Pennsylvania with Latinos. There were a lot of Puerto Ricans there and other Latinos that were excited. What I'm hearing from folks on the ground and organizers in Pennsylvania is that the campaign still hasn't invested enough on an operation. A lot of people are doing grassroots efforts to register voters. Some of the groups that I work with in my work as a consultant are doing that. And again, a lot of media presence. A lot of the people in the Hispanic media complain that Democrats have the correct policy, but they only invest in the few months before the election. I know that there are a lot of super PACs that started organizing early for the Latino vote since last year with Biden, and we need to see it a lot more, especially in Pennsylvania. But in Georgia, North Carolina, and in Wisconsin, there are a lot of Latino voters that could swing the election. Again, in the margins, these elections in these key swing states will be decided by a few voters, and that's where they need to invest the most.
You mentioned correctly that she has not done, Kamala Harris, a number of TV interviews, has not spoken to the media all that much. Obviously, she didn't have to run in a primary of any sort. She was just kind of declared the candidate overnight, so she's evaded, I would argue, some level of scrutiny that is atypical for the candidate in her position. What are you hoping to hear from her during this upcoming debate with Donald Trump?
I think that a refreshing new start with Harris, which is part of the reason she's excited a lot of progressives and a lot of independents and some anti-Trump Republicans, is that she's willing to take it on towards Trump. I think that Biden was a statesman, and when he criticized Trump, he did it in a very gingerly and forceful way. but she's a former prosecutor. So if you see the press releases, if you see her tweets, if you see the campaign messages on the trail, she's hitting Trump really hard. And I think that a lot of people were wanting and yearning for that. And she needs to do it in the debate. Now, as a strategist, I wouldn't play up how great of a debater she is. I think that in the 2019 primary, she didn't do great in those multi-candidate debates. And I think it's never a good strategy to play up your candidate. You should, it's better to overperform over expectations. And Donald Trump interrupted Biden in 2020. He obviously let Biden slide in the last disastrous performance. So I think that you shouldn't underestimate Trump's debating abilities and his antics, frankly, and his theater-like, tactics. So that's what I would recommend, and that's what I would love to see in the debate. And going again, in terms of the Latino voters, let's talk about all of the issues. Latinos are as much U.S. citizen voters as anybody else. Yes, they care about immigration, but a lot of other people care about immigration, not just Latinos and not just immigrants themselves. And so there are some multiple issues here. And to go to Nomiki's questions about what she needs to do with Puerto Ricans, she needs to recognize those cultural differences, not just with artists, but how you speak to those issues. And she went to Puerto Rico, didn't really have a great campaign stop there. And I think that if you focus on key issues, and we can get to that in another show, I think she has a great opportunity. And a lot of the advocacy and diaspora groups, Puerto Rican and non-Puerto Rican pro-immigrant groups are saying they're not going to go for a border-only security bill. And so there's a lot of messages in key media markets that she should target, and I think she has a great opportunity to do that. And I think her campaign knows it, and hopefully we'll see that.
While we have you here, because you talk about Puerto Rico, we are approaching very soon, in a few weeks, the 8th anniversary of Hurricane Maria, where this was an historic hurricane which ravaged the island. The island is still dealing with power issues, privatization, and now there's a major displacement of Puerto Ricans from the island because of the economic issues that existed before, some tax laws, and of course the devastation that hit the island. You mentioned that Vice President Kamala Harris visited the island to talk about some of these things, and it didn't go so well. Can you discuss a little bit more in nuance how this plays into the voters who have been displaced, who have had to move to the United States, whether it's Florida or Pennsylvania or other parts of the country, where you're seeing, essentially climate refugees from Puerto Rico come to the United States?
So it's no secret that Donald Trump was insulting Puerto Ricans, saying that Puerto Ricans threw the federal budget out of whack, questioning the amount of deaths. It was more than 3,000. Some even say in Michigan University it was 4,000 plus, and obviously withheld aid and restricted aid. And Joe Biden released some of those restrictions, and they've invested in green energy and in housing, but according to the federal government, only 8%, according to the GAO, actually, only 8% of the FEMA funding has been dispersed. And some of that is due to worker shortages and bureaucracy in Puerto Rico. And so there's a lot of nuance there, because when Kamala Harris went to showcase some of the solar panels that, thanks to the Biden administration, Puerto Ricans have access to, not a lot of people have been able to build them and put them in their homes. And so I think that she needs to be more aggressive in using the federal levers to get that money spent. And a lot of Puerto Ricans are concerned that if Donald Trump is reelected, that he might rescind that money, the unused funds. And so I think the Democrats made the mistake in 2020 of using Hurricane Maria and the paper towels as a talking point, and that wasn't that effective, frankly. And when Donald Trump called the politicians in Puerto Rico corrupt, a lot of liberals like me thought it was an insult to Puerto Ricans, but a lot of people that left the island said, yeah, one of the reasons that I did leave was because some of our politicians were corrupt. And I think that going back to the cultural aspect, Bad Bunny, the reggaeton artist, he's waded into Puerto Rican politics. He hasn't yet on U.S. politics, and there's another opportunity there for Harris to do outreach. And I think that they know this, and they have a great opportunity there. The campaign came out with a fact sheet about how much money has been invested in Puerto Rico. But if you talk to any Puerto Rican, it's one thing to approve the money, and it's quite another to actually spend it and see it on the ground. And the current governor in Puerto Rico lost his primary in part because he hasn't spent that money, and they don't see fixing the roofs and the roads and the hospitals that have been still broken down. And the electrical system is a mess. It's been privatized. And 8 years after Maria, there are even more blackouts than there were before the storm.
Federico de Jesús, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss the Latino vote. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Fede.
Thank you so much.